Hello everyone and welcome to episode number 1. In this video series we're going to be redesigning web apps. My name is Sebastiano Guerriero and a few days ago I reached out on X asking if there were founders willing for me to redesign their app and share the whole process. So this is the first project that I picked. It's Shopwrk and it's a web app for auto styling shops which allows them to manage all of their operations. So this is the product that we're going to be redesigning. Okay, so what is step number 1? Step number 1 is gathering information. You want to understand the business side of things before you even start designing the UI. So talk to the founder, ask as many questions as you want. Don't feel dumb if you don't understand the business. It's totally normal. I mean, you're not the one developing the business. You're the one who's going to be designing the UI. So ask as many questions as you want. One thing which is really helpful to me is to ask the founder to share the screen and show me how a power user would actually use the application. And so this is step number 1. Once you know more about the business side, you can start analyzing in step 2 the current UI and find the weaknesses and the things that could be improved. So this is the part where you start using your imagination and thinking about how you would redesign this thing. So this is a process that takes some time. Just let me show you quickly how I would approach it. So this is the UI. So first of all, there are many things that can be done in this application: managing the calendar, managing conversations. There is a payment system built within this application. So we are surely gonna keep the main navigation into the sidebar. One thing which is a bit strange is this separation here between the main navigation when you click on home and then you switch to the chats with the AI. If you click on this chat icon here, and then this plus button which is related only to the AI chat. This is a bit confusing to me because this plus button here looks as if it was adding a new item here. So we're gonna try and find a different solution for that. And then we have get set up, which I suppose is a way to gather enough information for the user to actually use the application. So this is an important part. We want to highlight it. There is a lot of empty space here, so probably this is not necessary unless it's being used somewhere, this space. But as you can see, it's not. So we're probably gonna get rid of this bar over here and move these two buttons somewhere else. So this is just to give you an example of what it is for me to analyze a UI. At this point, let's switch into Figma. So this is where the design part starts. I like to start my design in Figma because it's very fast for me and convenient to come up with a new design language. So let me show you how I would start this process here. As you can see, I already created a new design for the layout shell and for the main navigation. And this is actually how this is done. First of all, I start from colors. So it is important to understand if there is a branding color. In this case, the branding color is this kind of brownish color, which is, I don't love it to be honest, but it's down to personal preference. There are founders who don't want to change the branding color at all, but let's suggest a new one in this case. And I noticed they have this brighter orange on their landing page. So let's use this. Actually, let's use a more vivid version of this orange. And once you have the branding color, you can extract the neutrals from this branding color. So for example, if you switch to HSL and you reduce the saturation, you get a gray color, what's often referred to as a neutral color, but with the tint of the branding color, which I think is a nice touch. So how many neutrals do we need? So usually I start analyzing the UI and I start thinking about what if this UI was in a 3D space? How many floors do we have? There is this part here with the darker gray, which seems to be the lowest part of the UI, as if it was at the bottom. And then above this part here, we have these sections with the lighter gray. And then on top of these sections, we have the cards with this white background. So if we imagine that there was a light source, it will look as if the cards were the closest to the light source, and then the light gray area, and then the dark gray area. So this is how I name my variables. Let me show you, because I actually already went through this process. So I created, using the technique I showed you before, a color background darker, which is intended for this area here. And then for the areas that go on top of this, we have a color background dark, and then we have a color background for the cards. These are all the neutrals that I need. Now I need variables for the actual content which goes above this background, on top of this background. So for example, we need a color contrast high for the highest contrast, and in this case too, I do like to inject a bit of branding color into my black instead of having a full black color. And then we can pick a color contrast low, which is for muted text, icons, borders, these kind of things. And once you have these two colors, you can extract a third color, which will be color contrast medium. You can either do it manually, decreasing the lightness using the HSL here, or a better approach, I think, is to just copy the color contrast high, copy the color contrast low, and use a tool like Chroma.js, where you paste these two colors and you want to generate three colors. So it will generate automatically a color in between these two, which is this one, which is gonna be our color contrast medium. And as you can see, I already saved all these colors, including color contrast medium, including color primary. And I've also created a few variations of these variables just for different opacity levels, because in Figma you cannot use a variable in here and just change the opacity. You have to create, unfortunately, you have to create a new variable for it. So I'm just using a naming convention which is similar to the one used in Tailwind, which we're going to be using in the coding part. So that's all for now about the colors. Don't worry if you're not picking perfect colors at the beginning, because you can, now that you saved the variables, you can refine them later on when it's needed. So let's move on. Let's create now the layout shell. So let's pick desktop here for the frame, and let's fill it with background darker. We're gonna have the main content section here with the background dark. And on top of this, later, we're going to be adding the cards with the background, the white background. Okay, so first of all, let's start adding some shadows. The best way to add shadows is to use multiple shadows. There is a plugin for that, it's called Beautiful Shadows. And it doesn't create a single shadow, as you can see right here. It layers multiple shadows with lower opacities on top of each other, and the end result is much more realistic than as if you were using a single shadow. You can just tweak the distance from the light source, the elevation too, and you can reduce also the brightness a little bit. Let's add also a border radius of maybe 16 pixels, and why not, let's use corner smoothing, because now we can do that in CSS too. Okay, as you can see, there is a very soft shadow. One thing that I like to do is to create okay, we can remove this because it's zero opacity. This is zero opacity too, so we're just gonna need these three shadows. We're gonna add a new one, a shadow ring, so with the 0 for the y-axis, 0 for blur, 1 for the spread, and then we use a very low opacity of something like 5%. Then one other thing that I like, and this is a trick, is to add another shadow with the 1 for white, 0 for blur, and then a very low opacity. As you can see, it doesn't look good if the opacity is too high, but as you reduce it, it creates this nice effect at the bottom, as if the ring, the shadow ring, was not flat. It looks more as if it was a linear gradient. And now, because this element here is not white, we can also give it an inner shadow of 1 pixel white, 0 for the blur, and this time we use white. And you create this nice light effect at the top of the element, as you can see here. And then I do like to include these light touches into my UIs. So this is the design for the main container. Now we need space for the sidebar. How much space do we need? So there is no perfect answer here. It depends on how many items do you have here, how dense is your UI. So in this case, for example, we have a few items. So we have quite a few items into the navigation actually. So we are not going to create elements which are too tall. We could use, for example, 32 pixels, but you can go as low as 28 pixels to as much as, I don't know, 40 pixels. It really depends on how many items you have. So there is no fixed rule here. Now, about the distance from the sides, let's keep it to maybe 12 pixels here and also on the other side. Okay, let's give this some roundness, for example 8, once again corner smoothing. Let's change this color to contrast I5, and this is a navigation item. Now we need icons and then we need labels. So for the icons, obviously my suggestion is to use Nucleo, which is my product, so which is also sponsoring this video series. So Nucleo is a great icon library. Okay, so the UI icon family that is already selected here is perfect for web apps. So we're going to be using that. The style is going to be outline duo, and the size for the navigation items is 18 pixels. Now let's try and create a few items here. So we have, for example, dashboard, calendar, conversations. Let's create this. So we need an icon for dashboard. So I will be looking for grid because it gives me something like this one, for example, grid layout 7, which I think is perfect. Let's paste it here. For the color, let's use color medium for the icon because you don't want the icon to be too strong, so medium is perfect. Here we go. And now this is vertically aligned, and let's give it a distance of 12 pixels from the side. Now this is going to be dashboard. Now what is the font size you have to use? So here too there is no fixed rule. For example, in this case I'm using 13 pixels, which is kind of a standard, but guys, consider that in a sidebar like the Figma one, the size is probably going to be 11 pixels or even smaller because it's so dense, this UI, that it does make sense to use smaller sizes. So even here, there is not the perfect rule. You have to account for how many items you have here, how much space do you have. So for a 32 pixels item, it is okay to use from 12 to 13, even maybe 14 pixels, which maybe it could be too much, but it could work too, depending on the font. So I'm just going to use 13 pixels. And actually, just to show you, this is the typography scale that I'm using, which is based on all the application I've already designed. This works most of the time. Often you will find articles suggesting to use a typography scale generator, which uses a font size, a base font size, and a multiplier, which is referring here to as a scale. As you can see, you have different scales. and it generates all the font sizes in which are harmonious to each other. But trust me, these things work great on a landing page, on a blog, for example, but for products, for web apps, not always, because in web apps you will always need a high range of smaller sizes, 10 pixels, 11 pixels, 12, and then you have you are exponentially adding more sizes because you are rarely going to be using these big sizes here. Probably we're never going to use 32 pixels in this application. So anyway, try to use always the same size. This is the suggestions that I want to make. Like, try to always use text-based unless it is strictly necessary for you to use a different size. But there will be cases where you are going to need different sizes. For example, if there was a counter here just next to the navigation item with the number of notifications, for example, you will need a smaller size than 13 pixels in this case. So just copy this type scale or create one of your own. It's totally fine. Okay, now color. This is gonna be color contrast medium. What about the font that we're gonna be using? Now this is obviously for web apps. It's a little bit more limited, the number of fonts that you can use. If you use something very exotic, something very difficult to read, it's going to be very difficult for the user to read something, a strange font at 13 pixels, and that's why we often stick to the usuals. Inter, Geist, Roboto, all these kind of nice sans serif font. There are also nice serif options, rarely used just because it's more difficult to use those. So in this case, we're gonna be using Inter, which is, you know, one of the best fonts out there. We all know Inter. Okay, so what's the distance between Inter and the icons? 10 pixels looks totally fine. Now, guys, here too, what about distances? So you may want to be using a 4-pixel spacing system, so where every new spacing is a multiplier of 4, but again, it's not a fixed rule. You know, there will be designers who will tell you, you have to use, you know, those sizes because these are perfect. So it's not true. You know, you can break any rule actually. Like in this case, for example, we have an icon with 7 pixels above and below it. And obviously this will look, I mean, for some designers, this will be like unacceptable. But okay, guys, these icons are 18 pixels. And I know because I designed those that the live area is 16 pixels, meaning that the actual size of these icons is always 16 pixels. The extra pixel are just used for safe padding, for very rare cases where there are elements that goes, you know, to the edges of the icon, but it's very rare, which means that the truth is that this icon is about 16 pixels, and if you consider that the distance now is no longer 7 pixels, it's 8 pixels. So what I'm trying to say is test things until they look okay to your eyes. The only advantage of using a 4-pixel scale is that many times things will just align nicely without you even have to think about it, and they just will align perfectly because there is a proportion in using these scales. But if there are cases where you're not using them, that's okay, don't worry. Okay, so this is the first navigation item. Let's create a new one. So let's keep a couple of pixels of gap between these items. Whoops, I didn't include the icon here. So let's create a new one of a couple of pixels. Let's take these two elements here, create a auto layout, and then create a new one. So this is going to be calendar. This is going to be conversations. We need 2 more icons, one for the calendar. Let's go back to Nucleo. calendar, and we can pick this one, copy here, Shift Command R, color medium, conversations. Let's try looking for a conversation icon. This one is perfect. Copy, paste it here, and switch the color to color contrast medium. Okay, so this is how you build the navigations, the navigation items. You're gonna need a label, because if you check this version here, the current version of the UI, it's using line separators. It is okay to use line separators, but if you can use labels, it's better, because it's going to be easier for the user, to scan through the navigation items with labels. For example, this could be overview or something else. Now, it's not important, the name that we're giving right now. Let's use a color contrast low. And also, let's reduce a little the size. So you want to align the labels to the icons. So this is going to be here. Now, what about the distance from this first element? Let's try 8 pixels, okay? And let's try to create a new group of navigation items with a distance of maybe 24 pixels. Now guys, you have to test this even without the backgrounds, because just one item is gonna have the background, because maybe it's selected, or maybe because you are hovering over it. So let's remove the fill and let's see how it looks. I think it looks very nice. So this is an example of how you create this navigation. Now what about the search element here? So we can create the search in a slightly different style. So this is going to be an input. So this color here is that of a placeholder. Let's make it low. The icon can still be this one, but in this case we're not going to be using, no, let's just use a color contrast high with the lower opacity. Let's give it a, let's use it, actually, let's use shadows. When possible, use shadows, because stroke, they don't really exist in CSS. I mean, it could be a border in CSS, but let's use a shadow. So inner shadow, 0, 0, 1. And let's use a contrast high, 5, for example. Okay? So this could be the style of our search box. Obviously, we're gonna need a lens icon here, like this one, but actually for the search, let's use just a simple outline icon like this one. Copy. And let's replace this one. The color is still gonna be medium. Now, if you like adding some depth and light touches the way I do, a trick here would be to use another inner shadow, which sits on top with a 0 blur and a very low opacity, like this one. And then maybe drop shadow. This could be too much for some of you guys. It's totally fine to just use the shadow ring, but this is nice. To me, it looks nice. Like if you check now, if you zoom out a little, this is gonna give some depth to this element here. There is like an inner shadow here and a drop white shadow. That's it. What about the logo? Where do you place it and how do you align a logo? So when the sides of the logo, when the logo has the same width and height, so maybe it's a square or it's a circle, I do like to align it to the icons. Not left aligned, but align it in the center with the icon. So in this case, as you can see, it's not. Let's try now. Now it's perfectly horizontally aligned to the icon. I think it gives a nice balance, a nice optical balance. So now the distance to the left is 20. Let's do the same above it, and then you can move, you know, all the elements here and so on. So obviously I cannot design, you know, the entire navigations, but you know, the steps are kind of the same, You can add more items, add more icons. This should be up, obviously. So let's talk about this new trend of creating this container with rounded corners. They're nice, but give you some challenges because, for example, for the elements that go here, and there will be elements, let me show you a few screenshots. So there will be other inputs, there will be radio buttons, there will be other elements here, and it's a good habit to align those. Let's give them 32 pixels too. It is a good habit to align those to the header of the sidebar. So for example, if you add here also the button for collapsing the sidebar, can go here, and it should be vertically aligned to this here. So let's go up a little, and now they should be aligned. Yes. And this is going to be right aligned with the other elements here. So you want this section inside the main navigation to be vertically aligned with the sidebar of your navigation. So that's why these rounded containers are a bit challenging to design, because obviously, you know, they take away a few pixels from above and from the other sides. So let's make these 6 pixels maybe from above, so that we have more sides above it, and then maybe we can move this closer, and this could be, for example, another input element here. Now, as you can see, the space above it is not perfect, and there is more space on the sides, but trust me, that's okay. This is a trick which is often used, and you will notice it if you pay attention in many popular web apps. So let me show you real quick the layout shells that I created as options for the user, for the founder to decide. So this is similar to what we will be building before, and as you can see here, we have 8 pixels around this container. Okay. And we have about 16 pixels to the sides of the main content, and for this element here about 12 pixels above it, and it's aligned to this sidebar element here. And then we have the cards. For this other option here, I got closer to the edges. Now we have 4 pixels. When you do that, it's really there is a problem, and it's in the bottom right corner here, because guys, in Figma the frame is squared, so anything you do, it's gonna look nice, but the actual operating system browser window is rounded in Mac. It's squared on Windows, I think, and you know, as the operating system is updated, this roundness is updated too. So the closer you get to the edges with this layout, and the more difficult it is to make something which looks nice with the operating system border radius. So the suggestion I give you is to keep some distances from it, so that even though the rule of the inner circles, even though it's not perfect, no one is gonna notice. But obviously, if you get as close as 2 pixels, 4 pixels, then I suggest to just extend this element here and remove completely the roundness from some of the sides. In this case, for example, the roundness is just in the upper left corner. This is another option where I completely removed the container and added a border separator. So this is probably the easiest approach and something I would suggest, but trust me, 9 times out of 10, nowadays the founders will choose this, because it's a trending approach. So, and that's what Kassam actually picked, the founder of Shopwrk. He decided to go with this one, so we're going to be developing this one. Okay, now, what about quickly? This is the hover status. We already designed it. Nope. we already designed the hover status, and maybe we can just increase the contrast when an item is in hover. Now, don't worry, these things will be, this is going to be more of the focus of the coding part to make these things perfect. But just to try it out, so let's design quickly also an active status. Let's copy the style from the main container and let's paste it here. Let's move the roundness down back to 8. Now in this case, we want the color to be maybe background, so it's brighter and looks very nice. Also, contrast high. Here too, contrast high. High 20. Okay. A nice touch here could be to add an inner shadow of a -1, 0 here. And then, as you can see, it creates this nice 3D effect. Very subtle, which I think looks very nice. But this is, you know, this is up to personal taste. Could be too much for some people. Just decide if you want to include it or not. It's up to you. Okay, the last bit of the layout shell and of the navigation, which is quite interesting, is this part here. Is where we designed the bottom area. So as you can see, we moved these two elements here, the button for making phone calls, the notification trigger at the bottom. So this will trigger the user pop over, you know, for accessing some standard pages like settings, changing the color theme, and these are the same buttons as here. Moved to the bottom, which I think is okay. I've noticed that Vercel does that. They have the notification button in the bottom left corner. So let's do that here too. And then what about this button here? So I was saying before that some onboarding processes are very important because maybe the user cannot properly use the application until they complete some steps. So we want to highlight this properly, and that's why I came up with this design. Let me create this real quick here. So how is this done? So we don't need this part here. Okay, so let's create a banner and something like 60. Let's give it some border radius, for example, 8 pixels, corner smoothing. Now, the background color is background. Now, we are not using a black shadow here, it's a colored shadow. How do we create that? So first of all, there is a shadow ring. So drop shadow with 0% of white, 0 blur, and 1 pixel of spread. Let's bring the opacity down to 5 pixels, so very, very light. So let's copy this and let's remove the shadow and let's switch to a linear gradient going from primary to, in this case, I actually use the tool like Coolers to create a complementary color. So you just paste your color here, you lock it, and then you hit the space bar until you find some interesting complementary color like this one. So in this case, let me just pick the same exact color. Let's remove the layer blur and let's bring opacity up to 100%. So this is the color that I ended up using. Let's add it here. Now, you notice that the area in the middle has some gray tints into it. So you want to remove this grayish area in the middle, and the best way to do it is to using an easing gradient plugin. The easing gradient plugins, let's apply. So this is before and now it becomes like that. So the easing gradients, they introduce many stops in between the two colors that you picked, and the gradient is going to look just better. So this is going to have an effect of layer blur, something around 20. Let's move it below the box. At this point, you want to reduce the width, reduce the height, because this is going to make the shadow look more realistic, and move it right below the box, reduce the opacity as well to something around 30 pixels. So it looks already very nice. The final touch is to duplicate this. Okay, let's copy the style from this element here. Okay, and let's move it above also the shadow ring. Let's change the corner radius to 9 pixels. Okay. Now let's copy this element here. Let's hide the one above for now. Let's select the one below, and let's switch from fill to stroke inside 1 pixel. Let's use just a flat color. Which color is not important. It just has to be a color with 100% opacity. Let's bring back the other element. Let's select both, and let's apply mask. Now we have this. Now let's select the mask layer, which is a flat color, and let's use a gradient. The colors are still not important. Just select the color above, and let's reduce the opacity to 0%. Now let's move this closer to the other one, and as you can see, we are getting this nice light reflection. If you reduce the opacity to make it more realistic, check this out. It's gonna look as if the light, the shadow, the colored shadow was reflecting on the edges of the box. So the last thing to do is to take the main element and reduce the opacity to something like 90%. Now, I don't know if it's possible to see the difference looking at the video after the video compression. So let me reduce drastically the fill. That obviously you're not going to go down below 80-85%, but as you reduce the opacity, you will see tints of orange here and tints of blue here. So it's just going to make the box look nicer. And that's it. Let me bring this back to something like 85%. And here we go. So we have designed also this nice looking box with this nice looking shadow. Okay, so we've done everything for this first lesson. We've been doing this for about 40 minutes, so that's a lot. But I think we have seen together many interesting things about starting the design of a web application. The next lesson we're gonna be coding this layout shell. So that's everything for today. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.